Did you have something to say?
Welcome back, everybody. My name's Austin. This is Gaming as Adults. As you can see, this is a big behemoth of a computer that has been modified. This is my personal Thermaltake Level 20 XT that has been heavily modified. Many things have changed in this case, specifically to my needs, wants, and desires. In this video, we're going to talk about what exactly I liked, what I didn't like, how much I changed, and how I went about changing it. And if you want something really specific on how I changed it, there's probably a video on our channel. So starting off, if you've never heard of this case is the successor of the Thermaltake Core X9 case, which is a very large hunk of case. The X9 was more like perforated, more like powder-coated aluminum or steel chassis, a lot of metal, a lot of powder coats, and a lot of ventilation. And this case is a whole lot of the opposite direction of all of those. Both of these are slated to fit SSI EEB form factor motherboards, which for those of you who don't know, that is the technical terminology for saying that the motherboard is fucking huge. So there's that. You can fit a lot of graphics cards in this. And it's pretty much kitted out to put a lot of water cooling in it. Let's talk about what I did. So, as I mentioned previously, this case with all of its glass doesn't really facilitate a whole lot of airflow. So if you had any air-cooled parts in it, they're likely to turn into what can only be described as a wind tunnel or a jet engine. As you can see, I've got a graphics card in here that is air-cooled, and it is obnoxious. I mean, it is awful. The sound of those fans will easily blast through my Sennheisers when I'm playing a game. So, to help combat that, so this is the original front panel that I have heavily modified. On these cross sections here, they used to be like this aluminum looking plastic that just like snaps in there, and then it was solid behind it as well. I looked at this design and I said, that sounds terrible, because basically what you would have here is just this itty bitty little slot. I mean, it was literally like 1/8 of an inch. It was nothing. So, and that was your primary airflow through the front of the case. And I was like, that just simply is not enough. Even if you have an obnoxious amount of radiator in here, like I do, there's still certain parts that require air cooling. Even if it's just like the smallest little breeze that goes over. Things like, you know, VRMs or sometimes your RAM or even like hard drives. They do require a little bit of airflow going across them. And if you cut everything off with these solid pieces of glass and plastic all closed up, it doesn't bode well for the longevity of your parts. You'll run into numerous issues, just things that fail sooner than they really should. And at the end of the day, that really just becomes a nuisance on the builder's part. You know, you play in a game and then it's like, oh, file's corrupted, and you're like, why? So we went to Joann's, I want to say it is, and we found this sort of mesh. It's kind of similar to like a screen door mesh. This one, I'm not particularly a huge fan of it because, previously mentioned, it attracts hair and dust like nothing else. But it does allow extra airflow. So the way that I did this is on the inside, I cut out pretty much everything. And then I made these little aluminum dowels to help support everything. If you're really interested to see how I did everything, I have another video on that. Another series of videos. You can go check it out. But this is what was done, is I opened this. It should be noted that the way that I did this, it does not stay on the greatest. This obviously was not recommended. I'm not telling you to do this. I'm not even saying that this is a good idea. Financially, this doesn't make any sense. Performance-wise, it still doesn't make any sense. You could get the same benefit pretty much by just taking this front panel off 100% of the time and leave it alone. You've probably also noticed, if you're looking at any stock images, this top is not the same glass top. This top is another addition that I've made on my own part. The reason why I made it is the same reason as the front. There's just not enough airflow. So the way that I kind of tried to mod this is the front would be your intake and all the heat would just rise out the top. Normal convection, right? So I ordered a new piece of glass and I made these little risers. That way I could facilitate more airflow being brought through here, and for the most part it kind of works. You'll notice, if I can get this to stay still, that these metal bars are a little bit longer than the glass itself. That's because the original glass was actually the full length of these metal bars, and I reused the same mounting brackets that were included on the original glass top. I got this custom glass, and it's about an inch narrower. It's really not that much narrower, but it does do worlds difference. If you're interested in how I did this one, I've got another series on that one as well, and so we're just gonna move on from this and get into the main heart of the beast. So I know it's hard to see, and so I'm gonna do you guys a little solid. Let's get inside. Now, one of my viewers did say something on one of my other videos. I told him to hold off because I've got another video explaining his comment, basically. And he was talking about putting holes in the side panels, getting custom glass for that, such that you could get airflow through the sides. Now, I'd like to say that that is possible. And the way that you would do it is with these screws right here. These screws come off. This is just a pressure bracket. I don't know if that's such a great idea though, because I can tell you that there is some warping on this plastic. This plastic is not a very high-end material. And that glass was the thinnest that I was able to get, but it's still much, much thicker than this glass, this original glass. So you can see right here, so you can tell right there that there's a little bit of lighter material. That's not the paint getting scratched or anything like that. This plastic is black. That's that plastic being worn, because on the other side right here is where the screw hole is. So I don't know if putting any holes in this glass would be necessarily a good idea, because I think that the replacement glass that you would be able to get would be too heavy for this plastic. So it should be mentioned that the entire point of this build, when this entire computer, is to put as much radiator in it as it could facilitate. Now, what ended up happening is I got a little bit crazy and put more radiator in it than was really necessary at all. So inside of this computer, believe it or not, there are a total of 4 480mm radiators. And if you were questioning how big this radiator is, this is my index finger. I'm 6 foot tall male. So, I mean, like, that's a 3-inch radiator right there. There's 2 of them up top. There's this guy, which is a different configuration, and then there's another one on the other side. I don't like dead space in a computer. And so if you have dead space in your case, as a case manufacturer, then I try to optimize it as best as I can. One of the biggest problems that I had with this specific case is that it's a cube chassis, and I like cubes, I really do. But the biggest problem with a cube is, where do you put your reservoir and pump? There just isn't really a good location to put it. And so I came up with this idea. And this is not even how EK wants this to be mounted. EK says that mounting that reservoir like this with only one mount on the bottom is a terrible idea. Originally, I had 2 of these, which is standard form factor, but then I made this. This hard drive mounting system is from my Core X5, which is the previous step down to this case. Does that make sense? Is it really necessary to put this much water cooling in it? No. Do I need this much cooling? No. It's only CPU loop. So really no sense in doing it this much at all. But in the future, when I finally do upgrade, there's all this already put in it. But I'd like to say, and I'd like to make this a point, okay? When Thermaltake designed this case, they did not design it with anybody's radiators other than their own. So the bulk of my problem with having to come up with these hard drive cages, or forcing something in the front here, or as you've already seen, putting fans on top of the bracket in a way that it is not meant to be mounted, comes from the fact that Thermaltake's radiators are all 45mm thick. They might have a couple of 30s, but this is like an 80mm huge radiator. And there's no way that I would be able to fit this radiator in there without doing something cattywampus like that. Whoops, like that. Putting fans up top. Okay, well, she can't see the fans, so we're just gonna disregard. So a lot of this kind of comes into play. If you're a case manufacturer and you promote something like a water cooling case, but you don't have any native slots to put in a traditional reservoir, or you only design things for your own radiators, it's kind of like, what's the point? And I guess my biggest grievance here is like, I wouldn't have a problem if Thermaltake's water cooling components were brilliant. If Thermaltake could easily rival EK water blocks, then I would be like, for sure, by all means. But they're not. They're not even rivaling Corsair. And Corsair literally just jumped into this. So it's kind of like, why would you limit yourself like that? I just don't understand it. So that's a huge grievance that I have for this, and where a lot of my out-of-the-box ingenuity, if you will, had to come from. So another thing that I don't like, I really don't like this about Thermaltake, is you can't buy their accessories. So if you look really close, you will notice that these hard drive cages are the same mounting brackets if you wanted to mount a radiator vertically, right here, as opposed to having hard drives in it. You have to make a choice as to if you want to mount a radiator here, or if you want to have hard drives, because you're not allowed to have both. And in the event that you have something like, let's just say you have an X299 system, okay? With a very hot 18 core. Let's say you have a 9980XE, and somehow you manage to overclock this thing stupidly on all cores. But this is also a render machine, and you also have 6 GPUs in it, okay? More than likely, for a render machine like that, you do not care at all with hard drive space, and you want as much radiator as you can. If it were my machine and I were to put it in here, I wouldn't want as many of these brackets as I could fit in here. So I'd have a radiator down here, a radiator on the other side, radiator up top, and in the front. All of them. But there aren't enough brackets to do that. Even for a showmanship PC, which I would consider this to be a showmanship PC, or at least this case to be for it, there aren't enough brackets. So what do you do when there aren't enough brackets? Well, you do what I do. You get creative. Let me show you. So this radiator right here, this whole thing is one 480mm radiator, in case you guys were confused about it. This radiator is a 45mm thickness, okay? I did some funky metalworking and a lot of smashing in order to fit this in here. I cut off this bracket, I shifted a lot of things, and here's where I start to disagree with some of Thermaltake's design philosophy, alright? So this is normally meant to be a 240mm bracket, and it's normally meant to sit over here, and your power supply is going to sit horizontally at the back here, okay? So this is made to be a dual power supply setup if you so needed that much power. Personally, in my house, I don't have a breaker that can handle, what, 40 amps? That is not a 220 or 240 line. So I do not have that need, or really capacity. So rather what I did was I moved this. This is your other power supply bracket, by the way, in case anyone was wondering. So I moved this. Now here's something funky about Thermaltake's design philosophy. The reason why this power supply was horizontal in the first place is because there is a hard drive mount that was right up here on the underside of the motherboard tray for a total of 7 hard drives. I don't know why you would want that. Like, it's not accessible. If I'm not mistaken, it was a 3.5 inch, so that would be for either an old SSD, like a SATA 1 SSD, or a, let's see, a disk drive, or maybe for some reason you had a U.2 SSD. But still, those aren't that fast and run about the same speed as the normal disk drive. So I really don't know. And the amount of airflow that it would be able to get, like, there's no fans or anything. There's really no airflow underneath here, aside from what comes from the front. So I feel like this is a missed opportunity. I think what I did is ultimately the better decision, even if it is shoddily mounted with only 2 screws. I'm not a craftsman. I'm not the greatest at this, but I am learning. And you know, what's really interesting about this is on the View 51 and the Thermaltake, Level 20 HT, on both of those cases that we've seen and reviewed here, both of them had this removable power supply tray that could rotate 90 degrees, you know, so if you wanted a horizontal or a vertical, then it wasn't really that big of an issue. On the View 51, I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. On the Level 20 HT Hotel, it makes 0 sense because what they have allotted there is one big square. And so you just change a rectangle from a square one direction and then change a rectangle from the square to another direction. And so it doesn't change anything. Here though, having this power supply up like this means that I can fit a radiator here. And this is a full-size radiator. This is a standard Thermaltake sized radiator. This one isn't made by Thermaltake. I don't like their radiators. But it's, like, it can fit. It can be here. But they don't want it to be. And I don't think Thermaltake really wants you to be able to use it. Because, like, if you had it like this, okay, and you had it in its traditional form factor, and you did have a 240 over here, there's still a huge amount of wasted space right up here, right up top, on top of the power supply. It's not an airway caddy. If you put hard drives on top of your power supply, well, they're likely to get excess heat, or even worse, they obstruct the airflow that your power supply needs in order to cool off, and your capacitors could literally catch on fire. So that, in no meaning does this make really any sense across the board. I don't understand. I wish I would like to understand what they're trying to do. Like, what was the intent? You know? Because there's a lot of areas. This is one of those things where I talk about it all the time. Thermaltake as a company does not make bad products. They make products that are almost complete. I don't hate them as a company. In fact, I like their products. This is why I have purchased so many of their cases. It's that their products, most of the time, are acceptable, but not terrific. In this instance, The reason why I purchased this product is because it's literally the only one on the market that does what it does. It is the only case on the market that bodes an SSI EEB form factor while having a horizontal motherboard tray. It's literally the only one. Personally, I would have much rather had the Core X9. I think that the Core X9 was a more polished product. It was more thought out. The airflow was more thought out. Everything was more thought out. Here we have simple blunders. For example, let me show you. Let's talk about this. All right. As you can see, this is a radiator bracket. In the front, it's held on by two clips that you have to rock the radiator into and then lower it down. You probably, yeah, you can see them right there. Those two clips have to rock. There's an underside and it has to go down. Okay? Now we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that there's screws here. And Thermaltake as a company acknowledges that RGB is in, people like RGB, and they want to see their light up pretty fans. As demonstrated by pretty much all of the tempered glass in their product lineup. Okay? And we know all this. These are facts. So let's talk about this. Why would you make a radiator bracket that is almost impossible to use? Number one, if you look really close, you can see that there's a little lip right here. The reason why this lip is right there is because this metal bracket, if it was a solid stamped piece of steel, if you put a full radiator on this, I'm talking like a small radiator, like, yeah, it's a 480 millimeter, but it's only like, it's like extra thin. It's, 30 millimeters thick, okay? And it's filled with water. If you put that on this without that lip, there will not be enough structural support and the whole bracket will buckle. It will fall apart, okay? This lip is necessary. The way that Thermaltake intends you to mount these is to put the fan on the underside. But wait, why would you want to do that? Because wouldn't that obstruct the RGB from the thing that you're advertising? With all the glass? Yes, it would. So it's like, did you guys not think about this? And let's talk about this just a little bit further, all right? So I talked about that front bracket, how this entire radiator bracket must go in at an angle and then set down in order to sit flush. Did you know that if you have a fully extended radiator, like a 480 millimeter, or anything, actually, I think this is probably just the 480 millimeter, because the 480 millimeter is the only thing that's really covered by their support. If you have that mounted and you attempt to lower it in, especially for these larger, thicker radiators, it is a royal pain in the ass. The way that you must do it, for me at least, is I have to loosen up all of these fan screws and then slide the radiator forward, set the nose in, and then rock it back, and then I can slide the whole radiator and fans back, and then I have to go through and tighten them all up. And there's two of these brackets here. More than likely, if you have radiators up here, they're mounted together. All right? So why wouldn't you just make one large bracket? Disregard this wireway here. This is my own personal blunder because all of my fans are on top and I did not route them underneath and create that wireway underneath. Does it really matter? No, not really. It doesn't obstruct airflow. It just looks a little bit nasty, but when you put the glass top on, you can't see it anyway, so it doesn't matter. But back to what I was saying, it's really quite interesting. And then if we look at the case just a little bit further, you can see, okay, these are 120 millimeter fans, and you've got one strip going down the top. Well, let's talk about the front then. If 2 rows of fans are made to fit on the top, wouldn't you want 2 rows of fan in the front as well? Well, Thermaltake says no. Thermaltake says, why would you ever want that? why would you want something that matches? This radiator that I've put here does not fit. It does not fit at all, and I made it fit. There is no way that you were meant to put anything, well, you were not made to put anything on the front here except for 2 or maybe 3 200mm fans. And they're supposed to go right here, right in the middle, as like this sort of runway thing. Personally, I don't like that. It's an aesthetic thing. I think if there's fans in the front, if there's 1 strip of fans in the front, then there needs to be 1 strip of fans on top. If there's 2 on top, then it needs to be 2 in the front. That's just me. That's just how I feel. So there's a lot of these things here that I'm sitting here looking at it and I'm like, guys, these aren't even big problems to solve. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's just preference. But this entire feeling leaves me really, really distasteful. I understand it's a $200 case, and I'm really asking a lot. But at the end of the day, I'm really just deeply saddened. And the reason why I'm saddened is because Thermaltake is really showing their true colors now, which is to be a Case Labs knockoff. That's really what they are. And it makes me sad because now people can't even see what the real deal was. You can't get that stuff anymore. It's pretty much museum tier for computer stuff. You've got a lot of this, so much potential. But it's not there. I think that for Thermaltake, if they were to fix the bulk of my problems with this, I would prefer if they extended it about another inch. I made another video called Everything Wrong with this case, where I'm really just ragging on them, just going to town, pretty much. And one of my biggest complaints there was that the entire case really isn't compatible with 140mm fans. Up top, I wanted 4 140mm fans, and the case is barely not long enough. We're talking like a ½ inch not long enough. I was like, really, how much does that add to, you know, the material used or anything like that? It's a personal gripe. But I think that even if they were to solve all of my problems with this case, if everything was done and it was done right, you could easily market this case for $450. As it stands though, I wouldn't recommend it for $200. I wouldn't recommend it for $80. It's just not a finished product. There's a lot of things that are great about it. A lot of things that are innovative, if you will. But some of these problems are like major, significant. For example, airflow. How do you design a computer case and not think about airflow? And you can't expect everybody to be wanting to do this, even with just 2 radiators up top. It's not acceptable. The vast majority of people will never put this much water cooling in a computer ever. It has to be an option, but not a necessity. And the way they have it set up, if you don't have 2 radiators up top, no matter what's in this computer, it's going to die. So, at the end of the day, my feelings on this case are as previously stated. And so the next question is, well, what are you going to do about it? I've already tried modding, and there's still some things that I simply cannot fix. The biggest one being, the case is really, really heavy, and you guys can come over here and see this, all right? Right there. What happened was, I filled this case with water, and I attempted to grab these bars, and lift it. And that right there is a stress mark of some sort. I don't know if it's entirely like a fracture or if it's just a bend or something like that, but it is definitely a stress mark. I understand why you did it. You did it to reduce the manufacturing cost because it's easier to take a thinner gauge metal and bend it into a more sound structural shape than it is to just ship a very heavy box. But it still leaves me in a position of distaste because the overall chassis is just not capable. But this is everything that I didn't like and everything that I could change. There's a lot that I like about this case, and there's a lot that I don't like about this case. And I really don't mean to harp on the company so much, but unfortunately Thermaltake is one of those companies that any degree of criticism, and they will simply say that they'll cast you out as a heretic, basically. You know, any resistance whatsoever, if their product isn't perfect in your eyes, then you are the enemy, and, you know, just whatever. A lot of fanboys and what have not also do something similar, but I digress. This is everything that I've done to it. This is where it leaves me. I think what's going to end up happening is I'm going to end up designing my own scratch build, my own computer case. Because there's a lot of things that I like that simply do not exist on one platform. And so I think it would be my duty and diligence to put something like that together. If you're one of those lucky individuals who owns one of these things and you are also complaining about some of the things that I have griped about and want to know how I fixed it, I do have at least 2 series on, one for the front and one for the top. The stuff inside, it's so conditional that I don't think I'd really be able to help you. That and what I did to it really isn't even that big of a deal. If you're interested in any of our social media, the links will also be down below, probably underneath the 2 videos to start off those modding series. Stay tuned for any scratch build design updates or anything like that. I'd like to do a video, because I also need feedback, I'd like to do a video in the future where I'm basically putting out my idea and asking for criticism. So, but I'm Austin. This has been Gaming as Adults. Thank you guys for watching.